Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Hardie-Matthews, and I head up the account management here at Workbooks. Presenting with me today, I've got my colleague Debbie Cridland, and some of you might know Debbie because she works in our customer support team. I should also mention another colleague who's here with me, Ruth Thompson from the marketing team. Ruth's going to keep an eye on any questions coming in, and Ruth will make sure that the recording of this session is circulated to you within the next 2 or 3 working days, so have a look out for that. In terms of the agenda for today, we're anticipating that the webinar will take maybe 45 minutes, and we will have some time at the end for questions, hopefully. So let's start by looking at what we plan to cover. In the introduction, I'll give a little bit of background around targets and why we've introduced a new way of setting them up. Then I'm going to talk a little about the 2 main types of targets, which we're going to call fixed and variable, and I'll give a bit more explanation about what I mean by that in a moment. Next, I will hand over to Debbie so that she can show you within the product how to set up these fixed targets using the new target set record type, followed by showing you an example of using, if you like, the old way of setting up targets using values from another column, which is a great way to set up the variable targets that I mentioned. Debbie's then going to go on to demonstrate how you can take existing targets that you've already set up and use them to populate this new target set so that if you want to use them, you don't actually have to start from scratch. You've already got some information. And she'll finish off by showing you our recommendations for how you can maintain those target sets going forwards. If you have questions along the way, please put them in the questions section of the webinar and we'll respond to them all at the end of the session. If there's too many to deal with, we'll take them offline and email the responses to you. Before I go any further, I do just want to highlight, and I hope this doesn't cause loads of you to dial off, but I want to highlight this session isn't about how to build reports. That we're assuming that you already know how to do that bit, but it's about how you can apply targets to those reports. So, as you'll appreciate, being able to report on data in your system is really important. And being able to compare progress against a target is even more useful because it allows you to see whether or not the business is on track and provides you with factual information on which you can base your decisions. Showing targets in reports and charts, especially if you've added conditional formatting, like a couple of these screenshots on the right, if you add those to your data, it really helps to communicate the messages to your audience. For clarity, though, I do want to emphasize that the ability to add targets to reports and workbooks, that isn't new, but as mentioned in the agenda, there is a new way to enter them using a new record type called a target set. We haven't removed the previous way of entering targets, so don't worry about anything you've already set up disappearing. It will still be there for you to use. I mentioned 2 main target types, and I'm starting with fixed targets. I'm talking here about the kind of targets that are for maybe a specific person or a specific team, or maybe something like a target for sales of a particular product, and where you have a target that you want that person, that team, or the product to achieve regardless of other factors. For example, in this little snippet here from Excel, it shows a target sales revenue each month for various salespeople. But for you, you don't have to have financial targets. It could be something more like a target number of leads to qualify. It could perhaps be a target number of cases to close or meetings to have with customers and that sort of thing. So it doesn't have to be financial and it doesn't have to be monthly. It could be for a quarter or a year, for example, so whatever time period is relevant for you. The other type of target is a variable or fluctuating target. For example, you can't know the exact number of support cases that are going to be raised, but you can still target the team on the percentage of those cases that are responded to or closed or whatever metric it is that you want to measure. Similarly, most organizations can't predict exactly how many leads will come into the system. It'd be great if you could. But because you can't set an absolute fixed target for the number that have to be qualified in or out, but you could set a target that is a specified percentage of those leads that need to be dealt with. I'm going to hand over to Debbie in a moment so that she can show you how to deal with both of these types of targets within workbooks. But before I do, I just want to give you a little bit of background as to why we've introduced the new target set record type. There were various drivers for doing this. One was to address the challenge of having to enter your targets on multiple reports or multiple report views. Now you can enter your targets once and they can be reused, I should say, across multiple reports. So a little bit like referencing a particular cell value in Excel, if you like, you can use it in multiple places. Another driver for introducing these target sets was that we wanted a way to see a row showing the target, even if there isn't any data yet against that target. So for example, if it's the beginning of a month and no one's sold anything yet, they've got targets, but they might not have sold anything. With target sets, you'll see rows showing the target, even though nothing's been achieved. The two screenshots here show the same report. One is just shown as a grid and one is shown in a card layout. But in both instances, you can see an entry for Anne King, and you can see that she hasn't actually sold anything yet. With the original way of doing things, you couldn't do that. You couldn't see that. Another driver for changing the way in which you can set up targets is to make them much easier to manage, especially for people who maybe aren't that adept with reporting, sales leaders, for example, who might not be very experienced at building reports, but do know what targets they want their team to have. Debbie will show you that we've created a couple of wizards to help you set up your target sets, and the target values themselves can be pasted in from spreadsheets, which again, Debbie's going to show you. To iterate, we're not removing the previous way of setting up targets. So if you've already got some set up in your reports, you can keep them as they are. But if you want to reuse them, rather than having to build them into every report, you can migrate them into a target set without having to start from scratch. So for all of these reasons, we've introduced target sets, and I'm going to hand over to Debbie now so that she can show you the concepts that I've talked about.
Thanks, Jean. Can everyone see my screen okay? Lovely. So to get right into it, one of the main aspects of the new target sets is the ability to copy and paste data stored in external spreadsheets into workbooks to use as target values. While target sets are totally new and may look a little intimidating, I personally find it much easier to wrap my head around it if I start by looking at one of these spreadsheets. So here we can see a simple set of target values, one for each salesperson per quarter or for each support analyst per month, as it is in the lower set. The calendar or accounting periods being used can, of course, be changed to whatever timescale you base your targets on yourself, for example, years, quarters, or months. And now, taking this into account, the data we will need to include in our first target set will be the assigned to name / salesperson name, which is this column here, the accounting period along the top, and then the actual targets themselves, which are the values here. So if we go back into Workbooks, and then we navigate to reporting and then targets, you can see we're given two options on how to create a new target set, either manually using the new target button or the new target wizard. We really recommend you use the new target wizard, at least for your first couple of run-throughs of this, because as I said, they can be a little intimidating if you just go head first into it. So for this case, we will be setting up a target set for revenue achieved this quarter. And for this, we will be using the users and periods target set. We will be using the general target set wizard later on, so don't worry, I'll cover that a little bit later. So if we just go ahead and click into this, if it liked it. There we go, that time it worked. So first off is nice and easy, we have to name our target set. So if we do revenue this quarter, and then we can just do 21, 22 in brackets, just so it's a bit recognizable. Hit next, and you're taken on to the next step where you select which user group you want this to apply to. And self-explanatory, you get a drop down of all of your configured user groups. So if you've set them up, quite granularly like this, you could just select salesperson, and then if I show you onto the next step, it will select everyone in that user group. In this case, I'll just be manually selecting them. So I have here the report that I'll be using. So I need Anne King, Anthony Khan. Where is she? Jane Fretwell. I know I also have Dylan, and then I need the training user as well. And as you can see, you can select and deselect as many users as you like. And then we have to give this user group, so to speak, a name. So I can just call it salesperson. And this is just a sort of identifier for you to use later on when you're mapping across this field into the report itself. So on to the next step. We now select what year style we want to use. And we give you two options, so financial year or calendar year. And this is because you might have, say, your accounting year set up from April to March, but you might still want to set your targets, the standard January to December calendar year, just so things are a little bit easier to understand for your end users. But in this case, I will be using financial year. And then you select which financial year, so that's fairly self-explanatory. So 21-22. And then you select the period style that you want to base the quarters on. So again, you have the choice between months, quarters, and year. And in this case, since our data that we're using is quarters, we'll select quarters. So this is where it can get a little confusing, especially for your first time, because the whole concept of target sets is that you can include multiple actual sets of targets within one target set. And this is where you name and define them. So in this one, since we're only using one, or we could do closed op value this quarter. And then you select the target type. So numerical value or a bunch of different currencies. In this case, we will just be using GBP, but numerical value is for something, say, like later on, we'll be using it for the number of closed cases, just a flat number. So we'll go ahead and select GBP. And then we choose how to input our targets. And since we already have these values on our spreadsheet, we'll use enter values from a spreadsheet. And this is entirely new functionality that's sort of only being included in the target sets currently. It's actually really, really handy. So as you can see, it gives you this grid, which is a very sort of standard Workbooks grid, like this. And then if you hit the paste values button just here, you'll be given a big text field where you can simply copy your values in from Excel, paste them in, and it gives you a little example here of how things sort of should be configured on your spreadsheet as well, so you aren't going in blind. Then hit save and close. And then you can see that it's automatically assigned each value to the relevant user and to the relevant quarter as well. So if we hit complete, this is the target set itself. So this is what the target set record looks like if you were to open up one from the target set landing page. And you can see these match fields here, and this is what we use to tie the data stored in the target set onto the report itself. And then here are the targets. If we had specified more than one, they'll be listed below, the name of the target set, and then in the target values tab, as you could imagine, we get all of our target values. There's also a tab here for reports, which at the minute it will be blank because we haven't assigned this target set to any reports. But this is so that, say if I used this target set in 5 different reports, they'd all show here in a new row. So I can very clearly identify, if I were to make any changes to this target set, what reports would therefore be impacted. So we can go ahead and close that now. And you can see it's appeared in the landing page here. And we go on to our report, this one that I made earlier. Go ahead and edit it. And then just like the standard target functionality, we load up the summarized column. And an important thing to note here is that I've got a column called sales rep and the quarter column, and I've got them both set as grouping columns. Now this is really integral to using target sets, as you'll see in a moment. So we use the drop down and select use target set, select which target set we'd like to use. And then here we have these matching fields that we defined earlier. And this is where you select which column you want each match field to map up to. And as you can see, the total amount column isn't showing, which makes sense. But if I would have, say, a number of other columns on this summary view, they wouldn't show as an option here in this drop-down unless they were grouping columns. So they must be grouping columns they must be set as grouping columns in order for you to select them as matching fields. So for salesperson, I'll select sales rep, and quarter, I'll select quarter. And notice that these aren't named the exact same, and that's fine. We're just pointing it in the right direction. It doesn't need to be an exact match. And then we select the target value field here. Save and close. And then if we refresh this, you can see it's matched up everything correctly, and it's showing, including the CSS styling that I'd already configured. If I run this report for you, just so you can see a little bit clearly. So as Jean mentioned earlier, the user Dylan Jackson hasn't actually got any closed won opportunities to his name, but he is still showing in the report. And it shows that he's achieved 0% of his target. And that's that one. And we'll now move on to setting up a general target so that we can show you the other wizard that we have as well. So I have also got a report ready for this one, and we're just going to be doing a closed cases target for, say, a support team. So if we go back into our target landing page and hit target wizard, drag that across just so you can see everything clearly. And then instead of users and periods, we can use general target set. The two wizards are very similar, with the general target wizard being just a sort of trimmed down version, as it is not dependent on specific time periods, as you'll see as we go through it. Now, the name of this one can be closed cases current month. Now, I'm by no means an expert in naming target sets, so, take everything I name with a grain of salt. And then notice that instead of going through the users and the accounting periods and everything like that, we are just given a number of match fields where we can manually enter them one by one. And again, as I said earlier, they don't have to be an exact match to how you've configured your report. So I can do support analyst, because if we go back to our Excel sheet, what we need is the assigned to name or the support analyst name. So in this case, we're just using calendar months and then the actual target values. So I'm actually only going to enter two match fields here, support analyst and month. Hit next. So again, we're prompted to name our individual targets. And then we can just call this one closed cases. And this one is just going to be a flat numerical value. Okay, so that's the general target done. As you can see, that one is a lot simpler and still can be used for a number of reasons, but it's intended to be used for cases when you don't want anything tied to an accounting period, more or less. So we're now taken right onto the target values tab of the target set record itself. And we have a number of options here. We can paste spreadsheet values, add multiple values, or a new target value. So if I just go through each one of these individually, you'll see what each one does. So this is if you wanted to add them individually, so I could put myself in and then do January and then set the target here. Or I could add multiple values, which prompts you to paste them in, and then the paste spreadsheet values does the same thing as well. The only difference is that this has the option, you can just have them in sort of a more typical grid format, as opposed to being copy and pasted in this sort of pivoted table as you would in Excel. So what I'll do is I'll close that one off and then use the paste spreadsheet values. There we go. And again, you're given this little preview up here. Save and close. Lovely. So that's all populated automatically for me. So if I save and close that one, go back onto the report I made earlier. Edit the report, and then again, nice and easy. I'm sure most of you have done this a million times already. Notice that these are still grouping columns. Open up the summarize column. Go onto the targets tab, use target set, then closed cases current month, and then you map up the fields just as you did before. Save and close. So let's run that just so we can see a little bit more clearly. Here we go. Don't know why this has become so enormous, but as you can see, it is working completely fine. It's also important to note that while I have set these reports up to have criteria on the details tab to only pull through opportunities, well, in this case, cases from the current month, you may find that in order to trim down which targets get pulled through, we've added a new option here on the report for add target set criteria. And this is specifically designed to limit the number of targets that get pulled through if, say, if for whatever reason you don't want that criteria on the report itself. And we've also got is an accounting period, and then you can do, the current fiscal period or the current fiscal quarter, and that works as well. Okay. So we'll now move on to a scenario when you would want to use a variable target, like Jean went over in the initial introduction, and it is actually on the same report here. So if I load the preview, in this instance, I'm staying with the closed cases scenario because for a support team, you may want to set each member a target percentage of cases closed. For instance, you could want them to close 50% of all cases that come in a given month. And this is when we would recommend you use the sort of old target functionality to use a calculated column as your target value. So this is what we'll be going over now. And within this report, I have configured a couple of columns, as you can see. If I start off in the details tab, we have a calculated column called is closed. It's a really simple formula which outputs a 1 if the case status is closed and a 0 if not. This is used in our summary view. Our summary view here, where we're using a standard summary column called number of closed cases, which gives us, as the name suggests, a total number of closed cases. And you can see this is just a summarized column totaling up that calculated column in the details tab. The total cases column is just another summary column that is using the count function to count up all the cases we've had in, as you can see. So this is counting the column case number, which is just a unique identifier on each case record. And then lastly, we've got 50% target. As the name suggests, this column is what we'll be using as the target value, and this is also using a really simple calculation, giving me 50% of the total number of cases, but since this is a calculated column in a report, the value of this will actually sort of fluctuate in keeping with the number of cases that come in. So overall, it's very simple to set up. It's just sort of knowing when and why you do it, I suppose. And it's important to remember that this concept can be applied to more or less anything. For example, setting up a target for your sales team where you want them to be achieving something like a 70% closed win rate of all opportunities in a quarter, or targeting your marketing campaigns to receive a 50% lead generation rate or something like that. So now that we've gone over all the bits and pieces, we can go right into the closed cases column. And then we can just go straight into apply the target like you would with anything else. So onto the targets tab, then get target values from another column. And then you can see it automatically defaulted to 50% target because I was practicing this earlier. So we hit save and close. And I have got all these columns displayed in my preview here. So this is before I've refreshed it, before the targets have taken effect, but just so you can see, the number comparison. And then if I refresh this, there we go. So you can see that it's pulled through the 50% value, which you can see here, and then it's taking the percentage out of the total cases. The percentage of the actual from the target. And there we go. So that's nice and easy. So if we save that one and close that down, because next up is converting existing targets into target sets. And this is also really nice and easy. So rest assured it won't be very complicated. So if we go into this report here, next quarter pipeline. So as you can see, this is already set up with the target here. And if we go into the edit view of this report, we can see that the targets are currently defined per group. So I've just gone in and added them manually like this. And you can see here there is a nice, easy convert to target set button. So if you go ahead and click this, you can see it's magically applied everything into a target set record. It's pulled through all of the existing target values. And we've got our target here named target, very descriptive. And we've also got our match field. So we've only got one here because it's only one other column in the report, which is sales rep. It's also important to note, just as an aside, that if you use this method, it will automatically name the target set as the descriptor of the report. So it's always good practice to just remember to name this something a bit more descriptive. So next quarter's pipeline. Oh God, helps if I can spell. Pipeline target. Again, not the most detailed descriptor I know, but still better than nothing. And then you'll need to change the targets being used on the report itself. Select the target set that we've just created, and then map up sales rep with the column sales rep. Now it will look exactly the same as it did before, most likely. Yeah, there we go. So that's that one. I'll go ahead and close this. I will now finally cover how to maintain and update target sets once they've been created. So if we go back onto our targets landing page, I'll make this a little bit bigger for you. So let's go into revenue this quarter. So this is the users and periods target set we made earlier. So if we go into the target values column, tab, sorry, what we can do is edit grid. And in this way, we can manually update each of them like this, and then use the tab button on your keyboard to get through to the next one and save them like that. We also have the option to, if we go back and view it as a grid, so we can add a new target value individually, and it's prompting us to fill in all the matching fields and then the actual target value here, or you can add multiple values. Now this can be a little bit finicky because you'd think that you could just say, this is the one that I used when I initially set the target up, but because this has now been created and it has the full period name, the year, the short period name, all as matching fields, it's expecting you to fill in each of those in your copy and pasted data. So this can be a little bit tricky to do. So I do recommend personally either just editing it in grid, or alternatively, if you find that you don't need all of these, so like in our report, we only really use salesperson and quarter, you can just clear out these match fields so that you can then copy and paste them in and it will just overwrite them. You can also use the copy target set functionality, which, as the name suggests, takes a copy of the chosen target set, prompts you to take all the match fields and amend them as necessary, and you can, add the number of targets to it and then rename it as necessary. And then you can amend the target values on the copy. Now, this is especially useful if you're trying to, say, update a target set that's in use on a dozen reports, but you're not 100% confident in what you're updating, or perhaps you've taken a copy of a target set that's specific to a certain financial year and you want to copy the values, but just make it so that the financial year is 22-23 instead of 21-22. By taking the copy, it does mean that you just skip a couple of the steps of the admin and you can get right to it. And also any changes you make, of course, won't be impacting the reports that you've got hooked up to the original target set. So I think that's covered everything introduced at the start. So I'll hand back over to Jean, who will take it from here.
Thank you, Debbie. Hope that was clear. Let's recap on what we've seen. Let me show my screen. Bear with me one sec. Great. Okay. So yeah, we'll recap on what we've seen, and I'll just try and give you a couple of tips to bear in mind when you are starting to use these targets. So first of all, what I would say is think about, do you need to set up a target set? If your target's a variable one, then the answer really is no, because it would be too complicated to maintain, oh, that this week we've had 100 cases and I want people to resolve 70 of them, so I've got to change the target to 70 each, and then the next week it might be 50 cases have come in, I need to change the target to another number. So if it's variable, I would say no. But if you've got fixed targets, then you probably would be better off setting up a target set. As Debbie touched on, to make it really clear which target set should be used when you're working within a report and want to pull that target set into it, make sure that you've given your target sets clear and really unambiguous names. You might have a target set for this year, put the year in it, so that then when you set up your target set for next year, you know you're using the right one. Sounds obvious, but it's easy to forget when you're in the middle of setting these things up. And then if you need to modify a target, and sales leaders out there will be grimacing at my suggestion that you might ever reduce somebody's target. We usually like to put them up if we can, but there are occasions sometimes when you need to modify a target, and having just been through all of lockdown, I'm sure a lot of you have had to modify targets. So if you change it within a target set, do remember that that's going to impact all of the reports that use that target set. And if you recall, Debbie showed you that there is a tab on the target set itself where you can see a list of the reports that are currently using that set. So if it's going to have an impact like that, the right thing might be, depending what you're trying to achieve, the right thing might be to set up a new target set so that you can compare the achievement against both the old and the new target. If you want to see a row for all of your users or your teams or your products or whatever it is that you've got rows for which you've got targets, if you want to see those, even if nothing's been sold or closed or whatever it is you're measuring against, then you must use a target set. Using the original way of setting up targets, you won't see a row when there's a zero value against it. If you've got targets set up using that original, the older method, and you think it'd be useful to reuse them, then do have a go at migrating them. And actually, just a little tip, when I first saw these target sets, when they were first introduced, and I was frankly scratching my head a little bit, what helped me to make more sense of the target sets was to start by migrating some existing ones into a set and looking at the output it generated, and it helped things gel a bit more for me. And remember as well that in terms of trying to communicate with your audience, you can still use conditional formatting in conjunction with these new target sets, just as well as you could with the original way of setting them up, and really bring those reports and those charts to life and tell a story. We know that the target sets maybe aren't the easiest thing to wrap your head around. Don't try and do them in 2 minutes. Set some time aside to have a look at them. But to me, it is time well invested. If you set aside maybe half an hour to get a target set in place, the reusability of that and the application of it, I think, will reap benefits in the longer run. So here comes that section where we ask if anybody's got any questions. And I know that during the course of the session, a couple of people asked questions. I'm just going to go over them to make sure that everybody saw what my answers to them were. The first one was a question about if you weren't relying on targets for people. The example in use was campaigns, that you've got targets to achieve a particular revenue or opportunity value or whatever it might be as a result of a particular campaign. Can you do that? And yes, you can. If you use the second method that Debbie showed you, the general targets, where you're not having to put in who a salesperson is, and the same would apply if you were setting up teams rather than individual users. So this is all about thinking about, what do my rows show? Do they show products? Do they show campaigns? Do they show opportunities? What do they show? Do they show targets for particular organizations? If you've got some sort of target account list, maybe you've got a particular revenue that you want to generate per organization. So all of those things can be achieved. The other question that came in, it made me smile because this came up internally only this week. The question was that at the moment, with either the original targets or the new target set, you can show the actual value, you can show the target, and you can show the percentage achieved, or any sort of combination of those three pieces of data. And the question from Nick was, are there any plans to introduce any other ways of displaying that, and in particular, achieved, target, and the difference between the two? And if anybody spotted my response, it's, yep, this came up during a roadmap discussion earlier this week. So I haven't seen it being committed to the roadmap, but there was lots of wise nodding of heads and lots of people saying, yeah, that would be a really nice enhancement. So I'm hopeful that it will make it into a new release in the not too distant future. So those were the two questions that came in during the session. Is there anything else that anybody would like to add whilst we're all online? Seems pretty quiet on that front. Of course, you know, let me move on to my next slide. You might think of things afterwards. Maybe you don't want to ask them just now in front of everybody. That's absolutely fine. So if you do want to find out more, then of course, we've got a knowledge base. Hopefully you're used to using it, but you'll find it at workbooks.com/help. And for help specifically about targets, go to the workbooks.com/help/targets, and you'll find information there. If you're the authorized support contact for your company, then you can email support@workbooks.com or telephone them. I'm not going to read the number out. Hopefully you know it. And of course, do feel free to keep in regular contact with your account manager. You know, they're here to support you with whatever you need. They might direct you to the support team. They might direct you to professional services. They might help you there and then, but they are a really good central point of contact for you. All that remains then for me to do is to say thank you all very much for your time today. It's always a pleasure doing these sessions with you. I hope you find them useful, and please do let us have your feedback, because we want to tailor the content of the topics that we're delivering to make sure that the webinars are as useful to you as possible. As I mentioned, Ruth's going to process the recording of the session, and in the next few days you'll get a link to that. So, you know, go back over the recording, go and try targets out. Feel free to share this session with any colleagues who might need to know how to do this stuff. And I hope to see you on another webinar soon. Thanks, everybody. Bye for now.